Well, we have a privilege to introduce a very outstanding person today, Dr. Sharon Megdal. I talked with her the other day. She's full of wonderful information, Sharon. So you're going to be uh, informing us of many, many, many things. Sharon grew up in New Jersey. She's a transplant from there. She's been in Tucson area for 40 years. She has a background in economics, not just water expert, but she is now an expert in many ways about water resources. She's been with the University of Arizona. And that's about all I'm going to say, and let her fill in the rest of it. And she'll talk with us for a while, and then she will take questions. Sharon, it's all yours.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And my pleasure to be here from Central Tucson to talk to you. I will talk to the group as if, you're mostly about green, interested in Green Valley. I talk about water a lot. I try to customize my talks to be especially relevant for the area. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to time myself and try to talk not more than 40 minutes or so, 45. I have a timer here watching me. I know the talk was advertised as Arizona water, and I will talk about Arizona water. I will talk about the Colorado River Basin. I will talk about the Green Valley area and the Tucson area. But I decided to, talk about adapting to this drier future for Arizona and the Western US. And this is the third talk I've given in 3 days. And Thursday, I was actually in Green Valley to give a talk there. And then yesterday, I gave a talk to realtors from Tierra Antigua Realty. And so I've been getting questions, a lot of questions. So in this presentation, I anticipate perhaps a couple questions, but I know you'll have more. So I'm going to, as I said, talk some about groundwater and surface water in Arizona and surface water in the Colorado River Basin. But I do want to start out by saying a little bit about the Water Resources Research Center, where I work. We are an extension center and a research unit within the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Arizona. Our office is on Campbell Avenue, just southeast of the football stadium. We're slightly off campus. And we're in the old Boy Scouts building, as I pictured here with the emblem of be prepared, which is what we need to be when it comes to water. We do a lot of work that's real world connected through applied research, through our education programs and engagement programs. And I do encourage any and all of you interested to follow us through our weekly WAVE e-news digest that goes out and announces our upcoming events, most of which are free and on Zoom. Follow us on social media and the like. And I'll come back to a little bit of this later on. So one of the things I wanted to just mention here, because I forgot to put this slide 2 days ago when I was in the Green Valley area, and I was talking about groundwater, and somebody asked, well, groundwater or aquifers, are they the same thing or not? And I just thought this is a slide I put in a lot to talk about the water cycle, not to forget that no new water is created. It may move around, it may change quality, it may change form. And, we've got the water cycle, and we've got surface water, and we've got groundwater. That's the water in the aquifers. And this is very relevant to Arizona. Arizona relies on groundwater quite a bit. Your area in Green Valley relies on groundwater quite a bit. And it's important to just recognize that the aquifer and the groundwater, it's not just some pristine blue lake underground. It's water interspersed with sand and gravels and all kinds of materials. And geographic context is also very important. And so I like to use maps, and you'll see maps and photographs throughout the presentation. This is the water map poster that the Water Resources Research Center puts together. This is version 4.0. And what's notable about this map is that it focuses on the water features rather than, highlighting cities, towns. The counties are there, but the lines are very faint. And this talks about the regions where groundwater is managed. The green areas that you can see on here, the brighter green, are agricultural areas. And so this is a useful map that I'll blow up a couple of those side panels in a moment, because water is really very localized. So I'm going to talk about a snapshot of Arizona, but your situation in Green Valley may be different from Nogales' situation or the city of Tucson situation. And we're different, our whole region, from Phoenix or Casa Grande area. And so it's helpful to get a sense of kind of what are the issues and what's going on where. And it's useful to get an overall kind of overview of the water situation. So we're about 7.2 million people. We've been experiencing robust population growth. Statewide, we use about 7 million acre feet of water. An acre foot of water is a very Western US unit of measurement. Pretty much the only area in the world that talks about acre feet of water, and that has to do with the development of the West was for farmland and irrigation, and an acre foot of water, it was the amount of water that covers an acre of land 1 foot deep. It's about 326,000 gallons. Statewide, more than 40% of the use of water is groundwater. It's pumped water from the aquifers. Approximately 3%, maybe a little more, is reclaimed water. I'm going to show you another pie chart in just a minute, or a pie chart. And then surface water is very important to Arizona. From the Colorado River, our western boundary, also Colorado River water delivered through the constructed Central Arizona Project Canal that pumps water from the river uphill into Phoenix and then further uphill into Tucson. It was built to deliver more than half of the allocation that Arizona has of Colorado River water. And we're going to, of course, talk about the situation of the shortage in just a few minutes. And there are other surface water supplies available to the state. The Salt River Project supplies water from the Salt and Verde watersheds into Central Phoenix, and there are Bill Williams and some others. Now, that's on the supply side. On the use side, large majority of the water is still used by agriculture. More than 70%, or approximately 70%. It's sometimes a little hard to measure because not all agriculture's water use is measured and metered and reported. It's down from where it was certainly 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, as agricultural land has been converted to developments. And the management of groundwater, again, I'm focusing a bit on groundwater in this first part, is only occurs in these colored areas that are labeled as AMAs, active management areas. And I'll say a little bit about the legislation in 1980 that created these active management areas, but these go up through the central part of the state and up into Prescott. And they're the areas that come the 50s, 60s, and 70s were experiencing tremendous overdraft of what are really limited groundwater supplies. And in these tan areas, we don't really have groundwater management. And you see that's more than half the state. But when you look at where the population of the state is, more than 80% of it lives in the active management areas. And there are these things called the irrigation non-expansion areas where irrigated agriculture can expand. And just another thing to note is that although I showed you the water cycle and physically the system is connected, surface water and groundwater, Arizona's water law does not recognize that connection between groundwater and surface water. We're not the only state in the country that does not recognize that. And here's a chart where I took the the pie charts and the percentages from the Arizona Department of Water Resources and then added some words to it. But again, up in the upper left are some pie charts showing the sources of water, and this is recent. Older figures used to show more than, well, about 40% Colorado River water, but with some of what's been going on in the last few years, it's now lower. And it's important that to remember that the regulation of water varies across the state. And then also that environmental water isn't really measured. The demand of natural systems is not a recognized kind of water demand in the numbers. And I put this in red for today because I had these words, they were already in this slide I often use, that most municipal water provision is by publicly operated water systems. This is true in Arizona, it's true nationally. But 15 to 18% of residents in the state and nationally are supplied water by privately operated companies. And I know in the Green Valley area, you've got a mix of privately operated companies and publicly operated companies. And how I really got my start in water, as was mentioned by Paul, I'm an economist. I didn't really work in natural resources and water, but through serendipity in the mid 80s, I was appointed to the Corporation Commission by Governor Bruce Babbitt. And the Corporation Commission regulates privately owned water companies. And that was really my first introduction to water issues in the state of Arizona. Now, here are some blow-ups of some of the panels that were in that water map poster I showed you earlier. And I show this just to underscore that we have kind of a mosaic, a mix of different situations across the state. The panel on the left shows the relative reliance on surface water, groundwater, or a mix. So the blue area where you see Yuma here in the Southwest, a lot of reliance on surface water. The teal areas are where 75% or more of the reliance is on groundwater. And then in these other groundwater basins, there are pie charts showing the mix between surface water, groundwater, and in some cases, some reclaimed water. And then the panel on the right, also from our water map poster, shows land ownership across the state. And private ownership of land is in the minority here in the state when you compare it to the totality of tribal lands, federal lands, and local or state lands. So we have really, as I said, a mosaic, a mix. And so the water situations, the water regulatory regimes may vary. For example, tribal nations are sovereign and they do not come under state regulation, such as the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, which I want to spend a couple minutes talking about because it's just so important to what's going on in terms of water use, water supplies in our region, meaning the Tucson Active Management Area, which includes Tucson, Green Valley, Sahuarita, and areas to the northwest of Tucson as well. So as I've already indicated, we've got these active management areas. The Act created the Department of Water Resources, which has the responsibility of ensuring compliance with the Groundwater Management Act. Statutory management goals were established. And in most of the active management areas, the key management goal is to stop the overdraft of groundwater, to get to safe yield where you're not withdrawing more than nature or through actions replenishes the aquifer. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we go about recharging our aquifers in a few minutes. It quantified rights for certain groundwater users. Some rights are transferable. It requires the development of these management plans every 10 years with conservation programs in them for the municipal, industrial, and agricultural sectors. It restricted new groundwater uses, but grandfathered in most uses. The footprint of agriculture could not expand beyond what it was between 75 and 79. So in an active management area, if somebody says, oh, I think I want to farm here, I want to, irrigate. If there was not a history of irrigation on those agricultural lands between 75 and 79, you cannot bring that land into agricultural production. And that was one of the ways of kind of limiting additional draws on the aquifer. This limitation of non-expansion of the footprint of agriculture beyond where it was in that historical period is limited to the active management areas and those other little colored areas, the irrigation non-expansion areas. In the rest of the state, and this is happening in Cochise County, for example, and other counties, you can just go in there, an agricultural entity can come in there, put in deep wells, powerful wells, and start pumping groundwater for agriculture. The burden or responsibility of using renewable supplies was really placed on new residential and community development through an assured water supply program. And this is really important consumer protection aspect of the Groundwater Management Act. There had been, land swindles and deals before this where, unsavory developers sold land without any water rights associated with them. And there were dry lot developments, and that had to stop. And so Arizona really got in the forefront nationally of requiring a showing that you have water physically, continuously, legally available to serve the community and to also meet the requirements of the Groundwater Management Act. The adoption of the Groundwater Management Act was connected to funding to build the Central Arizona Project, a key project to bring renewable water supplies into Central Arizona. This link I give you here, and I think George will be circulating a PDF of these slides. So I have some links throughout it, and the PDF should have the links live if you want to go. This is a free documentary, Groundwater to Enact a Law for the Common Good. And it tells the history of the development of the Groundwater Management Act. It's really a great watch, and I would encourage you to take the time and watch it. It's free on YouTube. And then later legislation authorized this recharge and recovery program, which I've alluded to and will say a bit more in just a couple of minutes. Just to provide some context and also give you resources to the extent any of you want to dig deeper into some of these matters. I mentioned the management plans that are required by the Groundwater Management Act. The one that's currently in place for the Tucson active management area is the 4th management plan. The 5th management plan is being worked on. I give you the link here. But this chart here shows for the whole Tucson AMA kind of what's happened in the different sectors in terms of groundwater pumping from 1985 to 2013. And the blue on the bottom here of groundwater pumping is the municipal sector. And because of the introduction of delivery of Colorado River water through the Central Arizona Project, reliance on groundwater has gone down precipitously. The yellow, look at the width more than kind of what might be happening to the levels. That's industrial groundwater. And for the Tucson AMA in your region, you're very familiar with, there's been significant mining use of groundwater over the years. And while that looks like it's gone down some, it's still a substantial amount, but also there are other water use in industrial electricity generation, sand and gravel operations, fall in the industrial groundwater category, as do dairies, which we don't really have anymore in the Tucson AMA, but we used to. And then agricultural groundwater is the red here. And you can see there's still a substantial reliance by the agricultural sector on groundwater. And then the green, which is very limited, is the tribal groundwater. And on the right, which is hard, I don't expect you to read it. I can't read it, but it gives you a flavor of what kind of information is included in the active management area plan. And it shows what's happening to water levels between 2000 and 2010. And we have some areas where they've gone up because of the reduced reliance on groundwater and the increased recharge into aquifers of Colorado River water delivered through the Central Arizona Project. And some areas you see more red where they've gone down. So again, quite a bit of variation across the region. And I just pulled out this wording from the Tucson AMA Fourth Management Plan, where there are still cones of depression, areas where, you know, groundwater pumping is a problem. And they say they formed in certain areas reflecting localized groundwater withdrawals. And they mention the Green Valley Swarita area. And that's because historically, even though you have water providers who may have contracts for rights to CAP water, Central Arizona Project water, they haven't been able to bring it all the way down to the area. And so they are legally relying on pumped water and meeting certain requirements to replenish that and use renewable supplies indirectly through recharge. And that recharge is not always in the same location as the pumping. And so bringing in these non-groundwater supplies is very, very important. All right, so I've mentioned recharge and recovery, and let me just say a few more words about that, because that is important to all of Central Arizona, other parts of the state, and certainly our region here, the whole of the Tucson active management area. So recharge is simply the process of adding water to an aquifer. And natural recharge occurs from natural processes such as precipitation and stream flow. And so here's a photo I took back in November of 2019 of the Santa Cruz River in the area of the Santa Vera Reservation. And it was a time where there had been some rain, but there's also been some improvement to water tables because of reduction in groundwater pumping by the mines and use of some renewable supplies. And there had recently, not that, I don't know if it was a month or two before, in the newspaper or the Arizona Daily Star, a nice article about how water was coming back in certain areas just naturally because of the reduction in groundwater pumping. And so that's, some of that is, you know, natural recharge due to rain. Then incidental recharge, you know, would be when you water your trees or your landscaping. There's water that doesn't get used consumptively by the plants and the trees, and it may make its way down to the aquifer. Leaks in water lines is not a very positive reason for incidental recharge, but it happens. And then there's this concept of artificial recharge. These are projects that are developed specifically to add water, and they can be these large recharge basins, such as this one I took a photograph of at the Pima Mine Road Recharge Project, right near the Desert Diamond Casino and the terminus of the CAP Canal, where water's put in fairly shallow basins and then infiltrates and makes its way to the aquifer. Sometimes the water is injected in wells and directly put in through a well. And this has been a very, very important component of Arizona's water management toolbox over the years. It's helped us manage groundwater supply. It's helped us assure full use of Colorado River water, particularly through the Arizona Water Banking Authority, which I don't have time today to say much about other than what I'm saying right now, but that's an entity that was created in the mid-1990s was storing large amounts of CAP water when we had excess water, when we weren't using all our allocation and we had some rainy seasons and the flows were good. Starting in 1999 to 2000, we got into this drier period. And so the water available to store is not as plentiful. But the good news is we've stored a lot. It's in the aquifers and areas that maybe at one point had groundwater, but it had been pumped out. And so we have these underground storage reservoirs, which are quite kind of immune to some of the heat and dryness conditions that cause surface water to evaporate. And recharge and recovery has also been used to enable affordable use of surface water delivered through the Central Arizona Project. And if any of you did live in the region, and particularly in Tucson, in the early part of the 1990s, and I did, you're aware that Tucson originally thought it was going to treat its water through a conventional treatment plant, deliver it directly into the pipelines to people's homes, but there were a whole bunch of problems in introducing the new supply. So Tucson's whole approach to use of its Central Arizona Project allocation, and also that of other water providers in the area, is to store it underground and then recover it and pump it back up and introduce it into the delivery system. And this approach, this recharge of groundwater, has been very important for an entity called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But what I'd like to do is segue here to say a bit about surface water, because surface water is very important. Colorado River water delivered to the Central Arizona Project is very important to our region. And if you had a chance to read that essay, Reflections Adapting to a Drier Future, I attempted to kind of explain what's going on and what's been going on and why this declaration of a shortage, a tier 1 shortage for the first time ever, is so critical to Arizona. It has implications for Arizona, and particularly for certain water users in Arizona. So the declaration of shortage occurred in August, having to do with the timing of certain studies that the US Bureau of Reclamation puts out. But for some time, there have been articles about how the water levels in Lakes Powell and Mead, the 2 major reservoirs for the Colorado River Basin, have been declining. And this is just the one example that's perhaps an alerting one. Red alert: Lake Mead falls to record low level, a milestone in Colorado River's crisis. And interesting, Ian James, who's been doing a great job writing about water for the Arizona Republic, just took a job with the LA Times. So I'm sure he'll do a good job there too, but we'll have to see who's going to be covering water for the Arizona Republic going forward. And so we've been getting a lot of attention in our area about what's happening in the Colorado River. Here's another map. Just want to mention a few things about it. The physical boundaries of the Colorado River Basin are these darker, this dark boundary. The basin touches 7 states in the US and the Republic of Mexico. It's an internationally shared river. The basin's divided into an upper basin and a lower basin. Arizona is mostly in the lower basin, with Nevada and California. Water from inside the hydrologic boundaries is piped to many users outside, such as in LA, Imperial Irrigation Districts, Salt Lake City, Denver, Albuquerque. And all told, it's estimated about 40 million people depend upon the Colorado River water or the Colorado River in some way. All right, so here's a chart that the Central Arizona Project Board of Directors, and I served on that board of directors for 12 years, from 2009 through this last year, 2020. It's an elected position. Pima County has 4 representatives on the board. It's a nonpartisan board, and I should mention that in most ways, water is a nonpartisan issue or bipartisan issue, and has been. We come together as a state and address our water issues most often in a nonpartisan way. The CAP board is a nonpartisan board. Reminded me to just mention that to you. Anyway, this chart each month shows the levels of fullness of the reservoirs and the size of the buckets generally represents the size of the reservoir. The biggest one is Lake Mead. Lake Powell is not too far behind, and then the others are very small, and they're all in the upper basin. And the point is that back in 1999 or so, beginning of 2000, Lake Mead was full. We'd had wet winters, good rainfall, good snowpack, and it was full. And what's happened over time is we've been depleting the savings because of lower than average inflows and higher than average, what can be expected on average, utilization. The lower basin is allocating to users more than can be counted on an average basis based on tree ring studies. So this shows the August study from the Bureau of Reclamation showed that the water level was below 1075 and was projected to be below at the end of the year. And that's what triggered the tier 1 shortage. And the implications of this shortage are very significant for Central Arizona project. And that is because in order to get the project approved by the US Congress in 1968, in order to get funding, Arizona as kind of or Central Arizona as the late one to say we want to divert the water, even though the water was included in Arizona's allocation, had to agree that Central Arizona project would incur cuts before California users would. And so when we're in a tier 1 shortage, the bulk of the impact is actually in the form of reduced deliveries to Central Arizona project water users, some reductions for Southern Nevada Water Authority for Las Vegas. But then within the Central Arizona project, we have a set of priorities within it. And this block diagram, which I included in the reflections, shows from bottom to top, higher priority to lower priority. And what happened is in 2007, some triggers T1 of 1075 above sea level would require a tier 1 cutback and tier 2 and tier 3. But things got looking so bad in the kind of middle part of the last decade that come 2018, 17, 18, people said, you know, we've got to ensure that the system does not crash. And it's a good thing. I want to drive home is that people are watching what's happening very, very carefully. We're not waiting for things to crash. We're doing what we can to avoid that in keeping with legal entitlements and priorities and the like. It is really a complicated system called the law of the river. It's not a single law. And so what happened in 2018 into 19, this drought contingency plan was adopted. And they added a tier 0. They said, well, we're not going to wait for it to get to 1075 before we cut back on some deliveries. And so for 2020 and 2021, there already have been some cutbacks of deliveries within Arizona through the Central Arizona project. And then this overlay of the drought contingency plan said, and then if it gets to 1075, we're going to go back to what that original plan was and cutting back 300,000 acre feet plus of water deliveries. So in a nutshell, what this tier 1 declaration means as of January 1 is that instead of delivering 1.5 million acre feet, upwards of almost 1.6 million acre feet on an annual basis, there will be 512,000 acre feet less to deliver, virtually a third less of water to deliver through the Central Arizona project. And that has tremendous impact on the agricultural users, the non-Indian agricultural users of Central Arizona project water. It's not affecting the municipal users. It's not affecting the Indian priority users. So I just want to, I pulled out a couple quotes from the reflections to just drive home a few points. And that is what's happening now. People will say, we're not surprised by it. we plan for it. Of course, though it should add, we're not happy about it, but we plan for it because it's all in accordance with established Colorado River operating criteria, these 2007 interim shortage sharing guidelines with the overlay that I mentioned of the drought contingency plan. And then in that I said, reporters that all of us water folks were getting calls left and right from reporters about the declaration of shortage. And one of the main questions was, who will be most impacted? And the answer to that is those agricultural users who have been utilizing this ag pool of water. And the other priorities are not affected by this tier 1. And I just want to very briefly mention those ag pool users who are most affected tend to be agricultural districts in the Pinal County area and some in Maricopa area. And I just want to mention that, we're talking about groundwater and some challenges to it in our region. The situation in the Pinal area is really severe and significant because they already had a lot of pull on the groundwater. And now with the reduction in availability of surface water for agricultural users, they are, according to their groundwater rights, able to go back on the pump, and they're planning to do that. And it's just, there's more demand than in the long term can be accommodated. And that's why the Department of Water Resources is saying it's got to change its approach to approving these certificates or designations of assured water supply that I talked about earlier. And then a little bit more I wanted to say, I mentioned the Water Banking Authority a few moments ago, that we have water stored by the Water Banking Authority that could shore up some cutbacks for the municipal sector and tribal water users. The reduced water availability is a concern. And it's a concern for a lot of reasons. And one of them is that we don't know what the future is going to bring to us. It's Mother Nature has not been kind over these last 20 plus years, with the exception of a couple of years in there. And so we have to plan for poor water conditions, although, we can hope and be happy when we have the good water conditions. So planning is difficult. And then the main thing, other thing I pulled out here is that we've been living beyond our means when it comes to the lower basin and its utilization of the Colorado River water. And so, business should not be looked at as business as usual going forward. We need to think about what we should be doing in light of climate change and what looks to be drier, hotter future. So there are many outstanding issues. Meeting the statutory management goal of safe yield. Not all wells are regulated. There's a physical disconnection between some of that recharge that's going on and the reliance on groundwater. There are some issues relating to the Assured Water Supply Program and the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. These are relevant to the water providers in your communities in the Green Valley area. I don't really have time to go into that, so I put some pictures of some reports and a study that was done by the Kyle Center for Water Policy at ASU related to the Groundwater Replenishment District. And then outside the AMAs, what types of regulations and should there be metering and conservation programs? So there's a lot of work, active work on searching for pathways to solutions and some of the things that really contribute to arriving at these pathways and collaborative development of information and partnerships across and among all kinds of different jurisdictions, the private sector, public sector, and the like. And then here is a list of some of the options, desalination, which is expensive and tends to have a large carbon footprint, reuse of treated wastewater, conservation, of course, water banking, voluntary transactions and marketing, rainwater harvesting and gray water systems that you can do on an individual level. new ways of designing the built environment. As communities grow, we maybe want to show some of the transplants. And I know many of you, like I was a transplant, moved somewhere else, but I've been talking to some of my home building, friends and others and say, let's show the Easterners or the Midwesterners how to thrive in the desert and how to be good water stewards in the desert. And again, these processes are very important. Trust and respect. You have to be patient in some of this. These are tough discussions when you're talking about less water and more expensive water. How do you allocate kind of the burden? How do you keep in line with some of these different priorities? And it's taken some great innovation and creativity, and the state's actually done quite well, but it didn't come easily. And this eating with your partners is something that was brought out in a session, a conference session I hosted in Tel Aviv, Israel, with US and Mexico people working on desal and some Israelis working on desal, and the importance of getting to know your partners, which of course is quite difficult during the pandemic. So getting close to the end here, I'd like to just say, I've been getting the question, what can I do? What can you do? One of the things is know where your water comes from. And I don't mean the faucet. I mean, is it groundwater? Is it groundwater that's being replenished in the same area, or is it groundwater that isn't being replenished in the area? Is the recharge to meet the assured water supply requirements far away from the groundwater? Stay informed and be informed. There's a lot of focus on, informing, educating decision makers. And we have at least one from the state legislature at the meeting today. Thank you. But we're all decision maker influencers, right? We're the ones who can weigh in and tell our decision makers what we think, what we're concerned about. And being informed is really helpful to the process. Don't wait for the crisis, that there's a broken line or something's bad's happened. Try to stay informed, and think about your use of water and how you can conserve both indoors and outdoors. Outdoor water use is still a high percentage of municipal water use, but also indoors. Many of you are living perhaps in newer homes compared to, let's say, center part of Tucson. But for example, a new toilet, a low flow toilet, can save a lot of indoor water use. And please consider connecting to us through signing up for our weekly wave, or just going to our website and taking a look. This 2020 Arroyo, this is I think it ended up being 16 pages. I'm not sure if it's 12 or 16. It's a publication written for the general public. And this particular one was based on our 2020 conference that really looked at water at the crossroads, 40 years after the Groundwater Management Act. And what have we accomplished? Where are we heading? And Bruce Babbitt was a keynote speaker at the conference. And afterwards, he gave us a very nice compliment about the Arroyo. I hope he is sending them the link to it. It's available for free download. And then, oops, I didn't mean to do that. That was a mistake. Let me close that. Somehow my cursor was on the link there. And then check out our events. We just had our 2021 annual conference. It was virtual. As long as we're given permission, we put the recordings online. And so, take a look at some of our past events. We have two really interesting programs coming up in September. One's coming up on Tuesday about binational cooperation, the Bureau of Reclamation speakers, and then the brand new US Commissioner for the International Boundary and Water Commission is going to make some comments. And then on September 22nd, late in the day, we have a panel, a high-level panel talking about implications of Colorado River drought. And we will have a representative from Metropolitan Water Districts of Southern California. We'll have the president of the board of the Central Arizona Project. We will have the chairwoman of the Colorado River Indian Tribes. And we should have a representative of the Bureau of Reclamation, and two, a representative of the Nature Conservancy and an agricultural water user from the upper basin. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I look forward to questions. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Paul. I think, are you going to help with the moderating?
Yeah, I'll try to do that. I saw a chat that I don't know if you saw this or not. It says, my daughter's best friend's father was Dr. Megdal's high school geometry teacher. This came from Andrea D'Alessandro.
Yes, Representative D'Alessandro, we have that connection back in New Jersey. So it's, yeah, he was a very good geometry teacher. I will say that.
Okay, that's good. So if anyone else has a chat, please type it in. And I will try to come up with something. Anybody else? George, if you might have something to ask.
I got a question. We're in the area of agriculture. You, I think, indicated that the allotment is limited to a set amount back at a certain date. If someone was to, if that part of that, if someone was to go in, can somebody, I mean, if somebody was to go out, can somebody come in, vice versa, to take over that land to do the farming? And will they, can they have that allotment of that water? And the other part of the question is, in the area of allotment for agriculture, are there priorities given to the types of crops? In, for instance, one farmer is growing alfalfa for cattle versus another one is growing lettuce for human consumption. Are there different priorities given to those different growers?
So very good questions. Some of the water rights are attached to the land. And so agricultural land can be sold and the new buyer would have the rights associated with that land, as long as the water rights were not otherwise kind of committed. And I'll give you just a quick example. It's possible to buy land and extinguish the agricultural water rights and use that water toward an assured water supply for those lands. So once there's an extinguishment of the agricultural rights, you can't bring them back on those lands. But if they're not extinguished, they can be transferred to somebody else. And so ownership can change. Now, on the question about priorities, and that question brings up an important kind of, I'll call it a nuance. The Groundwater Management Act set up a system for granting irrigation rights to the landowners. But then it also overlaid with that what they called water duties. They determined how much water could be used per acre that could be less than the water right. It couldn't be more than the water rate. And so they looked at historical use and crops and so forth. So there was an effort to, not have people waste water. If you were growing, I'll just pick out cotton, a big crop in Arizona, and you might have a water right per acre that exceeded what the regulations, the conservation regulations said you could use. And there's, this has been since the 80s and into the 90s and 2000s. But then the agricultural folks said, well, we can get as efficient as we can. And we have, they've lined canals, they laser level fields and so forth. But there's a limit to our efficiency. And they started doing some regulations, conservation regulations on best practices, and not so much a quantity of use per acre, as long as they didn't exceed that groundwater right. Now, in terms of saying you can use this much more if you're growing a crop that somebody considers high value versus other crops, that does not occur. It's really, private enterprise, farm programs and the like are determining what people grow. And they don't say that you can have more water or you can use more water because you're growing something for people versus something for animals. And of course, animals eat things because people want the products of the animals. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
All right. I have a chat question that I have. Doug is going to ask you a question too. Is there a significant impact of mines near here? There's a question from Catherine.
Yes, well, mines have been a user of groundwater in the region, and for years there have been monitoring of the use and looks at things like sulfate plumes and other things due to the quantity of the water and the mine tailings and the like. And so mining water use is important to the mines, and it's important to the people who live near the mines. And interestingly, I'll just tell a little quick story, is in the 90s, when the Central Arizona Project water was just coming online and there were problems, I alluded to that, there was a whole look at how can we use this new water supply that's new to our region. And at the time, the mines said, we don't think we can really use it. Our processes, our chemical processes do not.
I have a question for.
Well, I think somebody needs
Before
to
you do that, can you just stop a minute down here?
On Ursula, yeah, we've got her muted, thank you. So they said, the chemical composition of the Central Arizona Project water is not good for our processes. But then years later, the mine went into an agreement with the Tohono O'odham Nation to take some of the Tohono O'odham Nation water and use it instead of groundwater. So things change over time. I want to mention that sometimes people will say, we can't use this water because this or that. And then processes change, you take a new look at it and things change. But the fact that the mines use groundwater is important to the region on the quantity side, because we want to get to safe yield, and every user, contributes to the groundwater pumping. And then there are some of the water quality implications that some others.
Well, I have two questions, not related. One is, do I understand from news I've been receiving that people in Wall Street are buying up water rights in Arizona, with the implication that they might hold us all to ransom? And the other question I have, which is completely independent, but from what you've told us today, do I understand that the areas that are not included in the management areas are open season to do as you wish?
Okay, I'm going to answer the second one first because you got it. There is very limited restrictions on water use outside the active management areas, and it's kind of the rule of the largest straw, and meaning the most powerful deep pump. And there are serious issues being faced in certain parts of the state because of new groundwater pumpers coming in. This has happened in Cochise County. And I will just say, and we have a state representative, on the call, but our legislature has not been that open to creating new active management areas, and the public hasn't wanted them. What they've said for many years is, let us figure out how to regulate and address water in our region. But the question is, well, they haven't gotten to that point yet, and the water is being used. And so it is kind of open season, and Representative D'Alessandro may want to add something here. And if you do, Paul, I'm happy to yield the floor, and I will come back to the Wall Street question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Megdal is 100% right about the legislature, but on occasion where it's really crazy to have a development without adequate water, the firefighters come in and tell them the truth that we can't even protect you against fire. So it's very foolish to build there. But that's been the most positive action I've seen. Hopefully it will improve in the future. Thank you.
I've talked about the assured water supply rules. There is for community development something called adequate water supply rules in the areas outside the active management areas. And the Department of Water Resources does a careful look to see that there's an adequate water supply. And usually a development will keep doing and iterating until they get the result that there's an adequate water supply. But I will tell you that if there were a determination that there's not an adequate water supply, in most of the counties, not all, but most of the counties, the development could still go forward. And the only one that would have to be notified would be the first purchaser of the property. And there's not even, I don't even think there's a requirement of how big that notice is, you know, in the documents. So the issue of consumer protection is a key one for areas. Now, to your question about Wall Street, again, you are correct that there have been kind of some of these asset management group, water asset management is a name of one, but there have been others, Greenstone and others, that have been buying up lands and the water rights associated with those lands. And some of that is potentially transferable. And so the issue of, if you want to call it speculation, in whatever you might want to call it, it is occurring, it is a concern. And this is a big topic that I think I'll not say more about now, just because of looking at the time and knowing we have at least one other question, so.
Okay, very good. But the water we have available in Arizona, let's pretend it's a bathtub. And the bathtub has 4 inches of water in it. And we had a really good monsoon season, you know, a lot more than normal, 12 inches, 13 inches, something like that. What effect would that have if we had, let's say, 3 monsoon seasons in a row like that, as opposed to if we had nothing for the next 3 or 4 years, like the Atacama Desert, like I told you,
Right.
in South America? How long would that take for it to be a real problem?
So that's a really good question. It's also one that I've been getting in the sense of what's happening with all that rain that we've been getting, right? And how much is getting down to aquifers and how much of it might be leaving the area. And there are multiple aspects, you know, except for the fact that there can be serious property damage and even loss of life due to flooding. But let's just not talk about that part of it. In general, rainfall is good. We want the water. The rainfall that we've gotten this summer can cut down on demand as well as recharge our aquifers. So, you know, there have been times, I don't have that many trees at my home, but I have a few and I water them and we haven't had to water as much because of the rain. So it helps on the demand side. And some people who have rainwater harvesting, either passive swales and the like in their area, you know, are finding again that the plants are doing well. They don't have to actively water as much. And then if people have cisterns and the like, you know, those have been filling up. As far as how much of it is making it to the aquifer itself, I have to ask some hydrologists that question. I'm not a hydrologist. Some of it, though, clearly evaporates. It pools and evaporates, so it's not making its way down. And some of it goes into the streams and washes and may, during, you know, particularly heavy precipitation events, flow out of the region. You know, what really helps our aquifers in the winter time, and we haven't had the greatest, you know, winter precipitation, get all that snow up in Mount Lemmon, have it slowly melt and flow downward and see that, you know, trickle more than the big swish in the Rillito Creek and the like. And that's what helps the aquifers. Sometimes when it's so fast, it just swings right by. And then the other big part of it is, go back to the pie chart and the water we're relying on. So much of it is coming from the Colorado River through the Central Arizona Project. The rain we get here has no bearing whatsoever on the water flowing into Lake Powell and Lake Mead and then down to us. We need good snowpack, not too quickly warming temperatures in the spring to get that good runoff. So, rain's good as long as it's not bad flooding and impacting property adversely, but it's only a limited part, an important part of our picture. One more thing I should say, and then I do think Ursula has a question, so I want to make sure I get her question. But the other thing I want to say is that you mentioned the bathtub and you said 4 inches. Well, the bathtub's not uniform, right? The bathtub could be a lot deeper with water in one place. It could be very shallow in another place. You have places where you have bedrock. And so in our region, we have these alluvial aquifers that have quite a bit of water in them that could be kind of an insurance policy for a while. But nature will not replenish that water at the rate at which it's been used, even with 4 years of great monsoon seasons. So, that groundwater that's there can be looked at as an insurance policy, but it's like your savings account. If you use it up, then it's not there for the next time you have an emergency. And so we have to be very careful about that. Yes, so the FICO orchards, they're an example of an agricultural water user that had a history of agricultural use between 75 and 79.
Oh, wow.
And they have grandfathered irrigation rights to use up to a certain amount of groundwater for irrigation purposes. And those groundwater rights are in perpetuity. Now, the groundwater could go away. It could get so deep that it's not cost efficient to pump it, but they have those rights to use that. And that is within kind of the agricultural grandfathered irrigation rights. So they are using water according to groundwater rights that they've been, that they were granted back in 1980. Ooh, that is, I think, one of the toughest questions I've been asked. And here I am, the professor, and I'm not going to want to grade because that's going to get me in trouble.
Well, tell me,
actually, but I'll say that Arizona has been at the forefront of groundwater regulations and has done a really good job. Now, we also know that there are some shortcomings in what we've been doing. And the governor's got a council, a Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council, and they've got a committee looking at the active management areas, and they've got issue papers. All of this is online. Go to the Arizona Department of Water Resources. It's all online. And we know what the issues are. And we know what might be able to be done about them and sometimes the obstacles to getting done. So on the groundwater regulation side in the active management areas, I say we're doing pretty good. I'd give a good grade. The hard part of the state is that there are these areas without any regulations, and some of them are facing the kinds of problems in the last 10 or so years or more that the active management areas were facing back in the 60s, 70s. So those areas, we need to be doing more, and it's hard for people to come together because at the legislature, it's, if you don't even have agreement in your area, and Representative D'Alessandro could speak to this, but I remember when I was executive director of something called the Santa Cruz Valley Water District in the early 90s, and that's how I really got my feet wet. And the way you could get something through the legislature maybe is if the region itself was in agreement. If the region itself is not in agreement, it is going to be very hard to move something through the legislature, and the legislature really is the one that has the ability to allow jurisdictions like counties to do things or to allow regional districts and authorities to form. And so it's hard because there are winners and losers. And I'll go back to my economics training. If anybody out there is an economist, you know, what you learn in economics is that, you know, you can do all this modeling and you can talk about something called Pareto optimality, what's good and not good, but it's all based on kind of starting from a clean piece of paper and being able to reallocate things. When you're already somewhere where you're going to have winners and losers, it's hard. And that's the problem that we're facing in many of the areas.
Given the grandfathered rights for example, the Pecan Fico operation, and the fact that we have, it would seem boundless new property building in the Saurita area. If we get to a point where there is not enough for both, is there any way that people and housing could be given better priority than the grandfathered water rights? And that's probably more a political question than a technical question, but I wonder what your thoughts are.
So it's maybe political, but I'll even say it's something else than that. It's actually a complicated question having to do with the way the laws and rules are set up, because remember earlier I mentioned something about extinguishment. The formulas about extinguishment are not that conducive to, let's say, incentivize retirement of ag lands for municipal development. And so the rights, we haven't really talked about the rights of the municipal development. Well, companies, water companies have what are called service area rights, and they're not even quantified. So I guess, Doug, the best I could say in the limited time here is it's not a linear calculation. It's not a linear equation. And it is possible that municipalities can grow and have more demands for water to serve their populations. They have to grow in a way that is in accord with these assured water supply rules. The agriculture can coexist, meaning it exists at the same time, although some of the lands are likely to be lands that are converted. But it's not this one-to-one. Okay, I take this acre and that amount of water now goes here. It's true if you retire the land from agriculture, you don't get to move that water right somewhere else. But how it gets transferred over to the municipal side is it's more than a little complicated. And better water lawyers are better able to talk to that than I, but I know enough to say what I've said. I think what I've said is correct.
I want to thank Dr. Megdal for her presentation. And if you're not signed up to receive the newsletter, the Blue Wave newsletter, please do so and attend some of the brown bag luncheon specials, because they really get into some good discussion. So thank you again for your presentation. It was great. And I will be sending out the PDF files to everybody that was on here today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Everybody be safe out there. Thanks for attending.